Song Side exposes the dark side of Chinese actors. Why menglong was 1 in 10,000. The room was quiet when Song Side spoke. Not the comfortable kind of quiet, but the kind that settles in when people sense a truth is about to surface. No dramatic gestures. No sensational tone. Just words, delivered steadily, cutting through the glittered illusion of an industry that thrives on perfection. And then came the line that froze everyone listening. menglong was 1 in 10,000. Not a compliment, lightly given. Not a phrase meant for headlines. But a verdict, heavy, deliberate, and unsettling. The industry that smiles too perfectly. From the outside, the Chinese entertainment industry looks flawless. Immaculate visuals. Polished interviews. Carefully curated kindness. Actors appear disciplined, grateful, unproblematic, almost unreal. And that's exactly the problem. Song Side didn't describe monsters or villains. He described pressure. A system where silence is currency, obedience is survival, and humanity is often the first thing traded away. Behind the flawless smiles, he said, lies exhaustion so deep it rewires personalities. Competition so ruthless it quietly erodes empathy. An unspoken rule that teaches actors to protect themselves first, because no one else will. It's not evil. It's colder than that. You don't stay kind in this industry by accident. Song Side paused before speaking menglong's name. When he did, his tone changed. He talked about how rare it is to meet someone in the industry who listens more than they talk. Someone who doesn't calculate every interaction. Someone whose kindness doesn't feel rehearsed. Most people learn to harden, Song Side said. He didn't. That's where 1 in 10,000 came from. Not talent, not fame, but character. Scenes no one sees. Song Side described moments that never reach social media. Actors yelling at assistants behind closed doors. Newcomers learning early that saying no ends careers. Kindness treated as weakness. Silence rewarded more than honesty. In that environment, decency becomes risky. And yet, menglong kept it. He thanked crew members by name. He stayed late without being asked. He didn't step on others to climb faster. Not because it helped his image, but because that's who he was. The cost of staying human. Here's the part Song Side didn't dramatize, but it lingered longest. Being different in a system like that doesn't make you special. It makes you lonely. People who don't play the game perfectly often carry invisible weight. They absorb more. They question more. They feel more. menglong, Song Side implied, never learned how to turn that off. And in an industry that rewards emotional armor, that can be dangerous. Most actors learn to perform even off camera. Song Side explained that many actors don't stop acting when the director says cut. The role continues, smiles calibrated, words measured, sincerity rationed. But menglong? He didn't have an off-camera persona. What you saw was what you got. And in a world built on layers of performance, that kind of authenticity stands out like a fault line. Why his absence feels so loud. When Song Side finished speaking, no one rushed to comment. Because suddenly, the grief people felt made more sense. menglong wasn't just mourned as a talent lost. He was mourned as proof that goodness could exist in a system that doesn't nurture it. That's why his absence feels heavier than usual. That's why people say the industry feels colder now. That's why 1 in 10,000 hurts. The dark side isn't scandal, it's erosion. Song Side didn't accuse. He didn't expose secrets. He exposed something worse. A slow erosion of empathy. An environment where staying kind requires constant effort. Where being decent doesn't protect you. Where surviving sometimes means becoming someone you don't recognize. menglong resisted that erosion. And that resistance, Song Side suggested, is rarer than fame itself. What 1 in 10,000 really means. It means someone who doesn't treat people as ladders. Someone who doesn't confuse power with worth. Someone who remains gentle even when it's inconvenient. In a sea of ambition, he stayed human. That's not weakness. That's rarity. The industry heard it whether it wanted to or not. Song Side's words didn't trend because they were shocking. They trended because they were uncomfortable. They forced people to ask questions. How many good people are worn down? How many learn to survive by hardening? How many, 1 in 10,000, never make it through? Menglong did. And that, perhaps, is why his story lingers, not as gossip, not as tragedy alone, but as a mirror held up to an industry that prefers not to look too closely. Final thought. The dark side's song side exposed isn't about villains. It's about what systems do to people over time. And in that system, Menglong stood out, not because he was louder, stronger, or more ambitious, but because he stayed kind. 1 in 10,000. And now that he's gone, the number feels even smaller. When the mask slips and the room goes still, after Song Side spoke, no one rushed to clap. The pause that followed wasn't awkward. It was heavy, like a truth had been placed in the center of the room, and everyone instinctively stepped back to look at it. Lights hummed softly overhead. Phones stayed down. For once, no one tried to turn the moment into content. Because what had just been said wasn't gossip. It was recognition. The scene behind the scene. Song Side leaned back, eyes unfocused, as if watching something replay in his mind. He spoke about sets where laughter stopped the moment cameras turned away. About green rooms filled with smiles that vanished as soon as doors closed. About young actors learning quickly that survival meant blending in. Never asking too much, never caring too openly, never standing out for the wrong reasons. You don't notice it happening, he said quietly. One day you wake up and realize you've learned how not to feel. That was the dark side. Not scandal. Not headlines, but numbness. Menglong didn't learn that lesson. Song Side described a late-night shoot, one that had run far past schedule. Crew members were exhausted, tempers short, the kind of night when courtesy is usually the first casualty. Menglong stayed, not because he had to, not because anyone was watching. He stayed to help move equipment, to thank people by name, to check on a junior staff member who looked close to tears. He didn't do it loudly, Song Side said. That's how you know it was real. In an industry that trains people to conserve empathy like a limited resource, Menglong spent it freely. Why that made him an outlier? Song Side explained it plainly. Kindness slows you down. It makes you notice things you're taught to ignore. It makes you vulnerable in rooms where everyone is armored. It makes you hesitate when others push forward. Most actors adapt. Menglong didn't. And that's why 1 in 10,000 wasn't praise, it was math. The quiet resistance no one applauds. There were no viral moments attached to Menglong's character. No dramatic standoffs. No public speeches about morality. His resistance was subtle. Choosing patience over impatience. Choosing respect over efficiency. Choosing sincerity over strategy. Song Side admitted something that made the room shift again. People like that don't get protected. They get overlooked. Not punished. Not celebrated. Just left to navigate the pressure alone. The cost of staying soft in a hard system. Song Side didn't romanticize it. Being 1 in 10,000, he said, often means carrying more weight than others realize. Feeling things more deeply. Taking silence personally. Absorbing the tension others deflect. In an industry built to reward endurance, sensitivity becomes invisible labor. Menglong carried it quietly. Until he couldn't. When the industry looked away. The most uncomfortable moment came when Song Side asked a question, one he didn't answer himself. How many times do we praise kindness after it's gone, but ignore it when it's standing right in front of us? No one responded, because everyone knew the answer. The label that now haunts the room. 1 in 10,000 began trending not because it sounded poetic, but because it sounded damning. If Menglong was that rare, what does that say about the system? If decency is statistical, what does ambition cost? If kindness is exceptional, what has become normal? Suddenly, the phrase wasn't about him alone. It was an indictment. What remains after the applause fades? Song Side finished speaking without a conclusion. He didn't need one. The image he left behind was enough. An industry full of light, built on endurance, where someone chose to remain human even when it wasn't rewarded. Menglong didn't burn brighter than others. He burned steadier. And maybe that's why his absence feels like a hole rather than a gap. The final scene. As people eventually stood and drifted away, one assistant lingered near the door. She said softly to no one in particular, "If he was 1 in 10,000, maybe we should ask why the rest of us are taught to be less." The room emptied, but the question stayed. And somewhere between reflection and regret, Menglong's legacy sharpened into something undeniable. Not a myth, not a scandal, but a challenge the industry can't unhear. Because once you recognize someone who stayed kind in a system that discourages it, you can't pretend you didn't see it.